are Brian Ruszczyk, CEO of Earth First Food Ventures, Dr. Jamie Bacher, CEO of Boost Biome, Dr. Dejan Hušman, CEO of denovoMATRIX, Tony Martens, CEO of Plantable Foods, Fengru Lin, CEO of TurtleTree Labs, Max Rye, co-founder and chief strategist at TurtleTree Labs. Please help me welcome our panelists. I'll let Scott take it from here.
Great, thank you for that, Catherine. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, I'll take the floor then, since you've opened it. I'll maybe a minute or two. So Earth First Food Ventures, we get involved only in agricultural processes or food technologies that actually have a positive environmental impact, whether it's lower water usage in the case of vertical farming, or production of Atlantic salmon on land through RAS technologies. We think the future of food production, or at least our existing archaic food supply chain, is in the process of being disrupted, and the focus towards new food technologies, plant-based assets in particular, have a tremendous possibility of reducing our global carbon footprint. And the more we can do to produce locally for local consumption, utilizing food technologies, we think adds a tremendous positive environmental impact for all of us in this disruptive food technology space.
And I suppose I'll go ahead and jump in next. So at Boost Biomes, we're developing spray treatments for crops and produce. The lead product is meant to reduce fungal infections in the field and also after harvest. It's the after harvest piece of that I want to focus on for this question, where we're stopping fungal infections of fruits and vegetables. So if you think of the times, the very personal version of this problem is when you out there go to your refrigerators, you take out the strawberries or the raspberries, and there's a little gray fuzz, and so you throw them away instead of eating them. That's the personal version. That's the very small part of the global scale challenge, where we waste about a third of the food we produce. Here in the US, we waste over 50% of the fruits and vegetables we produce. So these all contribute tremendously to wasted carbon dioxide, wasted water use, and so on. So every additional day that we save a peach being on the shelf or strawberries being on the shelf in the grocery store or in your homes is reducing the environmental impact of food waste. And so this is our first product. Boost's technology platform is very flexible, very powerful. It's going to lead to a number of different biological products. This is the first one where we see us having a sustainability impact, but by no means is it the last. We see a number of additional opportunities to increase efficiency of food security and food stability, and food abundance. All of that driving down waste and reducing environmental impacts.
And how about for you, Dejan?
Yeah, just also then add on to Jamie's and Brian's introduction. So denovoMATRIX is a company which develops biomaterials for cell culture, originally stem cell culture. And one of the areas where we're making our impact sort of on the environment are to do with the concept of clean meat. So the idea behind clean meat is that you would culture cells from animals in a laboratory condition, as opposed to the traditional method of agriculture, where you would have livestock sort of grown and slaughtered and then used to make burgers, which is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse emissions. And basically what denovoMATRIX is supporting clean meat with is one of the key bottlenecks is basically scaling up this process. So we have no trouble in deriving cells from animals and culturing them in laboratory conditions. But the real bottleneck comes down to, are we able to scale the production of animal-derived stem cells and then cells in order for us to have enough quantity to create, delicious burgers and sort of uproot the existing market of slaughtered meat versus clean meat. And we do that with our biomaterial technology. So we have developed specialized scaffolds which allow for these cells to grow in the quantity necessary for us to then produce kilograms and eventually tons and then metric tons of clean meat that can then be produced cheaply and effectively, and of course with a much lower environmental impact than current methods.
All right, great. Thank you for that. I wanted to go back to Brian and kind of get your thoughts around what you see as kind of the big trends around food, and also, how open are they to these new types of, plant-based as well as other alternatives?
Well, following on Dejan's comments, I think clearly cellular agriculture, whether it's for chicken fillet, fish fillet, or steaks, we think is the future. We think that's scaling a lot faster than people think out there. There's been, I think, just under $1 billion thrown at the industry this year from the big players and from big household names, the Sumitomos of this world, Nutrecos of this world, Temasek, et cetera, et cetera. So we think it's a future. It's just a matter of time before it scales. The technology's there. The IP is there. It's already on supermarket shelves in Singapore. You've had it on KFC in Russia. We think cellular agriculture is the future. Fermentation, which is right behind it, is also clearly an alternative to whether it's egg white protein or non-dairy products. We think both of these contribute to tremendous environmentally friendly results. And the consumer, we believe, at the end of the day, which is particularly the younger consumer and the younger generation, my kids, are in the midst of a movement towards sustainable, healthy end product that has a positive environmental impact. If we look at what's going on around the world, and no offense to my meat producers out there, but the meat industry has lost close to $20 billion this year, whereas plant-based assets are flying off the shelf. We can't keep up with demand. And those numbers tell me that there's a direct correlation between whether it's COVID or not, let's leave that aside. But this trend was already in place over the last 7 years. And we think we're in the first inning of 9 of it. So are consumers going to eat a cell-based bluefin tuna? Absolutely. We're convinced of it because the younger generation believes that our existing food supply chain is one of the last industries on the planet to be disrupted with new technologies. And we think we're right in the middle of it. And the newer, younger generations are clearly adapting to that technology. When Ethan Brown set up Beyond, everybody thought he was crazy. And look at the company today, right? Producing burgers out of plant-based meats. So I think the new generation for sure, and consumers will adapt to that. Not everyone, but we think the trend is already set. The train has left the station.
Right, I'm so excited to hear this, and you're so spot on. So thank you so much for summarizing that. Let's see, we do have a couple of additions as well. So Fengru and Max, thanks for joining. They're with TurtleTree Labs, and just so you know, Tony Martin, who is just being displayed as Dave De Palma, but it's actually Tony on his phone. Tony had some issues with his computer that crashed overnight, so he was running a few minutes late. So why don't we go ahead and do a quick introduction. Let's give Tony an opportunity to talk about Plantable Foods. What are you guys doing? And then we'll give it to TurtleTree Labs to talk about what you guys are doing. And if everyone is willing, we're going to be flexible. Part of being a startup is you learn to be versatile, right? So we're going to wrap up the panel maybe 10 minutes before 10:30, schedule 10:30, and give Tony back his time on his presentation. But Tony, please go ahead.
Thanks, Scott, and apologies for the delay. A lot of things, a lot of moving parts last night, amongst others, due batch. But so I'm the co-founder of Plantable Foods. We're a startup here in San Diego. And basically what we're working on is developing the next generation of plant-based ingredients. And we're doing that by harnessing novel crops. We started with identifying a actual plant-based protein that can replace animal-based proteins without forcing consumers or our customers to compromise on taste, texture, or nutrition. We found this in this enzyme that is known as Ribisco. Probably the most abundant protein in the world because it's the catalyst in the photosynthesis process. But if you look at it from a functionality perspective, it's more or less a hybrid between eggs, dairy, and meat. And the reason why I'm emphasizing functionalities, like we believe that obviously there's protein everywhere today. But if you look at what makes these animal-based proteins so unique and highly appreciated is that they not only offer nutrition, but that they also offer or create the texture of the respective animal-based products. And you just don't really see that with many of the plant-based proteins that are available today. So what we've done is we started to look for this plant-based protein that can actually replace these animal-based proteins, and we found it in Rubisco. And right now we have a 2-acre production facility in San Marcos where we cultivate a specific crop that is high in Rubisco, which is highly sustainable, doesn't require arable land, and can be grown throughout the year. It's called lemna. It's also known by its less appetizing name, duckweed. And what we then do, and what we recently commissioned, is a downstream processing plant, also here in San Diego, where we process that biomass in order to isolate that enzyme that we then sell to food companies.
Terrific, thank you. And Fengru Max, please.
Hey guys, we're TurtleTree Labs. We're actually based in Singapore. Myself, I'm actually from the Bay Area, but we are based here in Singapore. So we're the first company in the world that's actually doing cell-based milk. We have an amazing scientific team here. We have a lot of collaborations with the National Research Institute as well. What we're doing is actually recreating the entire environment that happens inside of a cow, or actually multiple different mammals, and able to recreate the entire composition of milk. So a lot of the stuff that you've been hearing about us in the news is we've been actually able to make human milk as well. And we tend to believe that might even be the future for milk in general. Aside from that, I think you guys were talking a little bit earlier about cell-based meats. Just a few days ago, we launched TurtleTree Scientific. So throughout the journey, throughout our process of making milk, we had to tackle the growth factor issue and all the media prices and so forth as well. So we actually are able to produce many of these different growth factors ourselves. And we're also now working with cell-based meat companies so they can have access to this as well. So these are a few different arms of the company that we're doing.
Yep. And hi, everyone. My name is Fengru, CEO and co-founder with Max. My background was in tech. I used to work for Salesforce and Google. And we are running TurtleTree Labs now for about 2.5 years. Very excited to be on the panel here today.
All right. So I think all of you, thank you again for that very brief introduction. We have, I think, adequate amount of time to really explore this deeply, but I want to start with something that's a little bit maybe more sensitive in the sense that, part of being a disruptor is that, we're also essentially taking away from existing incumbents, whether it's the dairy farms or whether it's the meat producers, the slaughterers, or different types of substitutes that are out there. What are your thoughts in terms of, as part of your growth trajectory, how is that correlated to not only regulation, but also lobbying efforts by the status quo incumbents?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's very hard to predict, right? I mean, in the end, it's a question of cannibalism, yes or no. I think if you look at how the market's developing, like overall, the macroeconomic trends show that buying power will increase. That there will be more people around the world in the next couple of decades. Obviously, it can start to, let's say, influence their revenues from traditional agriculture. But if you look at what's happening right now, is that already many of these large meat processors, I think like yesterday, ADM, for example, announced a $32 million investment in air protein. So they're obviously getting ready to be part of this shift that's taking place in order to mitigate the risk that this transformation in the food supply chain might have on their bottom lines. So the question is like, if the incumbents are fast enough to adapt and move along with the shift that's taking place, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that their bottom lines will be hit that much.
I can jump in a little bit. When it comes to regulatory, I'm actually quite amazed. Singapore turned out to be the first country in the world to approve cell-based chicken. This is a huge thing, actually, globally. And this means other countries may follow very quickly. But even if they don't, we already are going to start seeing these products come to market. Regulatory is a big issue that's been something everyone's been trying to tackle. Now that that's coming through, I do see a lot of the existing conglomerates, the dairy folks, already looking at how they can take some of these novel products to market. Aside from this cell-based chicken, even when it comes to novel ingredients, there's new ISO standards that were just that came out about a month or so ago that call a lot of these products natural milk proteins or natural, I guess, other types of proteins that are secreted in a different way. This is a big deal because it's not just labeled a GMO product anymore. So all of these different things are going to go a long ways towards getting things to market. And I do believe a lot of the big companies, a lot of the bigger folks are joining the race here.
Anybody else?
I'll go ahead and jump in here. Boost is coming at things a little differently. We're not in the cellular ag space, and so just to reframe that a little bit, when we talk about or when we think about stepping into a space where there are incumbents, largely this is biology taking over from chemistry. There's a lot of drivers for that, I think, in the industry quite broadly. And that goes on sort of both ends of legislation that sort of makes using chemicals less favorable, and also consumer interest that makes using biologicals more interesting or more attractive to farmers and packagers and people who treat food. And so Boost is basically stepping in here into an existing trend that is hugely dynamic. On top of that, Boost's technology is around understanding microbial interactions. How do microbes help each other to grow? And that's what we use to develop these new products. So in a sense, we're ecological products that are taking over from from existing biological products. And we think there's going to be a lot of powerful advantages to that to our customers, the farmers, the packagers, and so on. With one last point, and that's the regulatory point. We're really in a very favorable position. Chemical products, going through the EPA, chemical products have a long, expensive, and painful road. Biological products have a much shorter, much cheaper path to market. And as we're looking at registering our first product, we've actually already gotten permission from the EPA to submit on how we're going to submit for a 2 micro product versus their traditional and standard 1 micro product. And it's actually a very favorable outcome for us. We can treat the 2 as if they were 1 for most of the process. It's about as good as we could have hoped for. And this is going to be probably the first multimicrobial EPA regulated product that comes through. So overall, we think that this is it's sort of a pretty favorable position for us to be in.
So I want to give Brian an opportunity to speak as well on the question that I asked.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to follow on the comments from Dave and my colleagues over at TurtleTree with regard to incumbents and capital. Some of the largest protein producers out there, whether it's JBS or Minerva in Brazil, which is one of the world's largest protein producers. Okay, they're tearing down the Amazon and doing animal slaughter, and none of us agree with that. However, they have a war chest of capital, and they're aware of the changes going on in the world. And I think you see some of these big ticket names, Sumitomo, Nutreco, Nestle, Danone, they're putting their balance sheet to work for change. I don't think that's in question here. And I don't think it's an us versus them. We require their capital to make all this happen. And we're on a mission to make sure that they understand what we're doing. It's not trying to cut the incumbents out. The fact that they're in a legacy business that is maybe going in the wrong direction of all the panelists on this call doesn't mean they're our enemies. In fact, our mission is to bring them into the fold. Without sharing too many secrets, we have some of the big players involved in investing with us, but they are in legacy businesses and they're aware of their incumbent position, but they're not stupid either. They're very smart and they know exactly what's going on the planet and they're moving in that direction. I think we need to encourage them to put capital to work for all of us, the change in the industry, the climate change and our planet itself.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point, Brian. I think companies like Dyson and some of the larger food producers recognize that they need to extend their product portfolio to account for these new types of alternatives and innovative solutions. And I think it's a reflection of changing market demand and preferences. Now, there are some, legacy incumbents like the cattle industry, for instance, that are going to have a difficult time expanding their product portfolio. Unlike the food companies, they're not going to be able to simply bolt on, the kind of work that Dejan and others in the cell-based meat, for example, are going to be able to do. There is a question that's come up from Teresa Tribble, and she wanted to ask Fengru and Max a little bit more about the cell-based human milk and how they foresee that will become the future of milk. And I think one of the things that we talked about prior to this event was you guys are working on a number of different milk products. It's not just simply bovine, but it's also other types of animals, including humans as well. And certainly when it comes to humans, we've seen some major issues with quality and to the point where, lives have been lost. So talk about what the market is like out there and what are the options and how is it being perceived from the consumer market?
Thanks, Scott. If I can speak to this, one of the things that we're learning over this journey is, yes, we can make bovine milk, sheep's, goats, and camel milk, but at the early stages, the price point is still going to be somewhat high. So we are going to need to focus on a few different areas. And another thing is this category design. One of the things that we're doing this year is starting to figure out where we want to be in this entire industry. And one of the things that we're starting to do is thinking about how we can look at human milk, not just for babies, but for all humans. Because if you can make any type of milk, an entire composition of milk, why not look at producing this something that we can be able to pass on to all these different consumers that are out there. I mean, there's a lot of evidence around benefits of human milk for geriatric care, a lot of
for adult nutrition, gut health, immunity. So lots of different complex proteins found in bioactive proteins found in human milk, as well as complex sugars. And these can be applied to functional ingredients in our day-to-day food. And this is some of the interest that we've seen from our dairy industry partners to be able to upgrade their current offering of products to something that is more functional and better for their consumers.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So really, you guys are getting into almost like supplements as well as nutrition, and in some ways even borderline therapeutics to an extent. So how do you guys start to kind of focus and what are the kind of the requirements and characteristics, and how does that get translated into the actual manufacturing?
So we wanted to look at, you're right, it can get into therapeutics and a number of different things. But in reality, what we're really looking at it is just food
applications.
Yeah, food applications, and they have a lot of benefits, basically. Yeah. So if we can get into the functional foods, and you're right, early on it's going to be how do you get a blend of different proteins and complex sugars and human milk fats that can mix into existing foods. And a little bit further out, we're looking at the entire human milk product and how it can actually be a part of everything from cheese, butter, cream, and everything else that's out there. It sounds a bit crazy. This is one of the first times we're actually talking about this, but this category design is something that we're going to focus a lot on coming up. Is how we can actually look at human milk playing a bigger role across the board in the entire dairy space.
Even if you look at milk as a product, today it's a very ingredient focused product. A lot of the end products like yogurt, creams, they're actually powdered and then put together in larger volumes in the dairy processes. And milk has 2,000 different components in it. For the first 2 years of our product launches, it would be ingredients taken out from human milk. And these can be more directly implemented into current offerings. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And the brands will continue to have that customer touch and have that customer engagement while we help them to upgrade their offerings.
Well, it's interesting because all of us have kind of grown up with cow milk and cow cheese, of course, and just dairy products overall. But to switch over to human cheese, human milk, It sounds odd, but yet it's really more natural and more intuitive, isn't it? So I think there's going to be a lot of kind of re-educating people's baseline as you roll out your products. I want to come back to Tony and Dejan as it relates to, let's talk about meat in particular, or meat substitute. So what are the challenges of cell-based meats, and how are some of your solutions addressing that? And then for Tony's, I think you guys are looking to replace, those actual meat with plant-based. But what are all the complexities around the functionalities that's needed to support those various different applications?
Tony, I guess you're in a better position to discuss it in more detail. I mean, when it comes to texture and all of these things, I'd let you go ahead first.
Yeah, sure. It's a very good question. I mean, I don't know. I'm not working in cell-based meat production, right? So, it's only from hearsay and reading. I think obviously with any novel technology, the challenge will always be scaling up. Everything is possible in the lab, and everything is possible in flask. But how do you bring it from a lab or a flask to, let's say, a certain size bioreactor that represents pilot scale, that can basically do 1,000 liters, and then how can you bring that to 1 million liters, right? I think that's where the biggest challenge lies, and which is something that hasn't been done before, and where that particular industry will have to focus on in order to overcome the challenges. If you look at the plant-based space, if you see what kind of progress has already been made and what kind of products have been able to be created with plant-based ingredients, it seems to be much further along. I mean, the other day, Impossible Foods announced that they're cutting wholesale prices by 50%, which is obviously a major step forward to achieving price parity, which overall is an unfair battle, considering the fact how heavily subsidized and how little restrictions animal-based meat slaughterhouses have. But having said that, I think if you look at texture, I think obviously taste and texture. If you look at animal-based meat product, it has, for example, take ground beef. It has the stickiness. It has this certain oil binding capacity, fat binding capacity, which makes it less greasy than many of the plant-based meats that are out there. So a good example, for example, if you look at plant-based meats, if you put them in the griddle and you grill them, there's obviously a lot of fat and moisture loss, and that has to do with the fact that the plant-based proteins aren't really good encapsulants of these fats and these moistures, and resulting in a potential dry texture or an excessive amount of oil being added to the product that can then jeopardize the nutritional label. So what we've done is we've been looking at, for example, if you take myosin, which is like one of the key proteins in meat, it has a certain emulsifying and adulation property that allows it to encapsulate these fat emulsions really well. And then when you take it actually releases that fat composition in your mouth. What we've done is we've looked at these different plant-based proteins. We came across Rubisco, which actually has similar emulsion capacities and stabilities as dairy proteins, which is like the golden standard. But then again, also can create gels at a similar concentration as myosin. So what that allows us to do is basically create these emulsions and then encapsulate these emulsions, which can then be incorporated in these meat products, significantly helping plant-based food companies to reduce their fat concentration while giving that same fat explosion, so to say, when they take a bite out of their plant-based meat product. And thereby obviously reducing the nutritional or improving the nutritional label, because you can reduce the amount of oil used, you can reduce the amount of sodium used in order to still enhance the texture and flavor of your final plant-based meat product. Having said that, we're actually also working with a couple of cellular meat companies, and that has to do with the fact that one of the biggest challenges, as far as we've understood, within a cellular meat is the binding, so the scaffolding of the various compounds. And once again, because our protein has these unique functional characteristics that allow you to basically bind oil and water, but also have this minimum gelation concentration that's relatively low, you can actually help support that scaffolding of these various compounds that are cellularly grown.
From there, since finished off with scaffolding and that's sort of the core competence of denovoMATRIX. So that's really the issue which we are then attempting to solve with cell-based agriculture companies. So when they're looking to expand cells to the degree which is necessary for creating a burger, but also the variety of cells in order to recreate that burger. When you think of traditionally like a burger meat, you usually have a meat portion and you have a fat portion, and then depending on the complexity of the meat that's trying to be recreated, sometimes you might have multiple types of meat cells, like muscle cells, multiple types of fat cells to recreate that kind of structure, that kind of flavor that you're looking for. And maybe I would expand the discussion a little bit further and just sort of think about how exciting this field is in terms of how you can stratify it. I mean, I think Fengru mentioned it briefly, or maybe it was Max, when you're saying that you guys are producing different kinds of milk, everything from goat, camel, different kinds of milk, cow, and human. I think the same kind of stratification can be thought of in terms of meat as well. It's not necessary to just think in terms of, okay, can we reproduce chicken or beef or duck? But we can also think about reproducing completely different animals which were not considered sort of sources of meat. Maybe kangaroo meat would be something to think about in the sort of Australian markets, even more exotic meats like snake or what have you, but also to think in terms of democratizing certain types of products which would be completely out of reach for most users. So think of something like Wagyu or Kobe beef, which all of a sudden you could produce in sort of like cellular agriculture, and then offer that to the masses at a much reduced price, but having that similar type of flavor composition. So I think this is a really, really exciting industry in that respect. I have to say that from Tony's perspective, it's coming much closer to the end user in terms of experience with regards to flavor and texture. denovoMATRIX focuses quite a bit on the earlier part of that manufacturing, so the bottlenecks which are associated with really getting that mass of cells, getting those muscle stem cells to differentiate and start forming these myosin like fibers, so that you really have them like a meat-like texture. So this is where denovoMATRIX is having its expertise. So what we have is really a platform for creating these all-important scaffolds and recreating sort of the key type of scaffold that each cell type would necessarily need in order to successfully grow. And that's where we have sort of our unique technology, and where we believe we can then make the big difference and supply the various companies in the cellular agriculture space.
Great, thank you very much. So we only have a couple of minutes remaining, so I want to give everyone an opportunity to give your final thoughts, something that you feel that's important that you want to share. And then I'll ask Brian to wrap us up at the end and kind of give your perspective around, what does it mean for investors and how should they rationalize these kind of diverse AgTech, food tech opportunities?
I mean, we could go ahead and start. I think just to take where Denovo left off, we believe that plant-based has been an amazing part of this huge change, and I do believe cell-based is going to be the next big thing. Once we can tackle the scaffolding issues, the media prices for all the growth factors and everything else that's in there as well, I do believe that this is going to be the next big thing, and I think plant-based is going to be a big part of that solution as well. I think if we're going to feed the world, all of these things have to come together to be able to make that impact. Yeah, and for me, I guess the importance of functional nutrition is going to be more and more obvious, especially in COVID, and as we move along with the aging population. So when we are able to produce food that is not just nutritionally good, but also functionally very nutritious, this is something that the industry will move towards.
Jamie, any final words?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead. Obviously, I'm coming at this a little differently from the other folks in the panel. Generating more food through maybe not traditional means necessarily, but looking at how we can impact agriculture, food abundance, food security, and food safety. Boost is one of the first companies, maybe the first company, that's taking an explicit ecological look at this. And what I mean here is when we grow our food, it's not really just a biological process, it's ecological. The crop isn't growing in isolation, the crop is growing in an ecosystem. And we are explicitly taking advantage of that. We're looking at the other players in those ecosystems, and we're working to control those. We think this is, I kind of like to call this that we're developing ecological solutions for ecological challenges. Our products are going out into the dirty real world, and I mean literally dirty, but sorry, no pun intended. And this is where I think we've got a unique advantage, and it's something where I think we have a really exciting opportunity to change how we produce and preserve and ensure the safety of our foods. I couldn't be more optimistic about it. So thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of moving parts, right? I think what you're going to see in the coming years is you're going to have like an inverted pyramid, so to say, where currently still at the bottom you basically have traditional agriculture, let's say animal-derived products. In the middle, slowly but surely expanding, you have the plant-based foods, and then like a small top where, based on the recent launch of Just, you might have some cellular products coming out. Based in the next couple of decades, I would see that going to invert, where at the base you have plant-based nutrition, in the middle you have some cellular products, and then the traditional former animal-based products will be on top and will be exclusive high premium products just because of the environmental costs and reduction in subsidies that will ensure that these products will become too expensive for normal people for the average person to eat. I think what's going to be important though, what you've seen in the past with clean tech, is that a lot of money has gone to clean tech in the early 2000s, which created this huge bubble, right? And from an investment perspective, I do have a feeling that you start to see a similar trend in the food and AgTech space, where every day there's a new startup that's coming out that's heavily funded. But I do hope that investors understand that this is not because you also see a lot of traditional tech investors that suddenly start to fall for the promise that food tech has. But I also hope that they realize that it's not something that has a similar trajectory as a SaaS platform, for example, where you can work towards an exit within 3 to 4 years, as changing the food industry and changing the supply chain takes time. It takes certain capital investments, and it's not a 3 to 4 year horizon, but it's actually a 10 to 20 year horizon. And the last thing that you want is something that's so promising and that can have such an influence on our future lives to have a similar boom and bust as we saw in the clean tech industry in the early 2000s. And that also comes down to vetting the right ideas, making sure that the technology is feasible and sound, and that there aren't too many bets placed in other third parties to come up with innovations in order to make the business models work out. I think it's a mutual relationship between both the investors and the startups, but overall it's a long game, right? And I think that's the most important to keep in mind. That these investments will eventually start to pay off, but it's going to take time, and we all should grant the industry the time to make those changes.
And Brian, please.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Dave. I think we're at the doorstep of a confluence of innovation and capital. And the innovation is there. The intellectual property is there, whether it's fermentation, cellular ag, or plant-based. The innovation is there. It requires those incumbents, whether they're producing sugary chocolates and Nestle and Pepsi and all these things that shouldn't be in our dietary daily intake in the first place, but that's a different topic. It requires the incumbents, whether it's sugary or animal slaughter protein, meat protein, to get on board and put their balance sheets to work in what is coming regardless. Dave talked about exits, 3, 4 multiples. I think if you get the incumbents involved and you don't need to focus on a short-term VC venture platform exit, this is permanent capital. And it's not just about 4x, 5x MOIC in 3-4 years time. It's also about social capital. Are we doing the right thing for the planet? And I think that decision has already been made. And I think capital is moving in that direction. And as I mentioned earlier, the younger generation making sure it's happening. So I think the incumbents need a bit more education. They're already participating. They're getting their feet wet. But I think it's just a matter of time before it's a floodgate.
All right. Well, I want to thank this panel. Just an incredible, rigorous conversation. I thank you for such an amazing and intellectually and exciting conversation that we had. Let's see. I'll ask Brian and Tony to stay on, and if we can ask Chris and Daisuke to join back. If you recall, Tony had some computer issues and he's had to log in as Dave, but in fact, Dave DePalma is actually Tony, Tony with Plantable Foods. So we only have 1 minute. Real quickly, Tony, if you could recap for us your company, and then let's give Chris and Daisuke and Brian an opportunity to ask some questions.
Yeah, sure. So in a nutshell, we are a startup food company here in San Diego. We're producing the next generation of food ingredients by harnessing novel aquatic plants. In a nutshell, we've developed a plant-based ingredient that can replace eggs, dairy proteins, or meat proteins, depending on the application. Right now, we have a 2-acre pilot facility in San Diego where we're able to process up to 3,600 pounds of biomass on a daily basis. So far, we've been working with over 35 companies in the space, of which 10 are already in their final stages of production trials. Last year, we raised our seed round from, amongst others, Larry Hippo, Vector Ventures, and Kellogg's Venture Funds 1894. We have a team of 12 people consisting of various backgrounds coming from Beyond Meat, Hampton Creek or Just, as well as Perfect Day and Memphis Meats. And we're now at the brink of working towards commercialization, and we expect to launch our ingredient in a consumer product this year.
I want to pass it back to Catherine. I want to thank again our panel of heroes. Back to you, Catherine.